Got it. Man, this is slow today. There we go. Read it. And record it. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is May 4th, Scott. May the 4th be with you.
Oh, and also with you.
I did my time in the Catholic Church. Hey, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding for all you Catholics out there. I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy, all that stuff. So I have the experience, and I can make jokes.
I'm a Catholic too, so I'm allowed it to as well. And now it's supposed to be, and with your spirit, you know. But, yes, every time I still think May the 4th be with you. That's my almost, initial responses, and also with you.
Tomorrow Cinco de Mayo on Friday, so that's going to be a dangerous proposition as well for folks out there. I am Rob Howe. That is Scott Docterman from The Athletic. We're a little early this morning, and the reason for that is I have to take my son to school around 10 o'clock. So we're rolling early here, a little bit early, half hour, 20 minutes, something like that. We're going to focus on some transfer portal conversation, recap the draft and how wrong I was with what I picked, and all that good stuff. And we'll start with the portal, Scott, and kind of the vibe of the questions I got on the mailbag this week is people, I don't know if it's lack of patience or, and I say people, I mean all Iowa fans, and this should be in context too. It's not, world politics or anything like that, but just people, it seemed like there was a vibe where everybody was kind of like, why isn't the Iowa women's basketball? They got Caitlin Clark. Why can't they get one of these big players? And, the men have openings in the post. Why can't they add more post players? And Iowa football obviously needs a receiver. Why are we not hearing more names? We talked about it last week that the portal closed on Sunday in terms of players going in there, but this is going to be a process. And I know basketball is a little bit farther ahead than football in a way because of spring practice, but can you tell people not to panic here, that the wheels are in motion? It just, sometimes it takes time. And I think the thing I said this on Tuesday, with Bluter, McCaffrey, and Ferentz, they're different in a lot of ways, but one thing they have in common is their chemistry and culture. They're very cognizant of that. Not that other coaches aren't around the country, but it is a big part of what they do here at Iowa. And they're going to do their due diligence and not just bring kids in.
No question. I mean, all three consider themselves somewhat of a developmental program. And, then they're pretty good at it. All of them are. I mean, when you look,
they're good at identifying talent.
In the last 5 years, Iowa's third in the Big Ten in wins in football. Basketball's since 2012, only Iowa and Michigan State have one or less, but both of them have one losing season in the Big Ten. Women's basketball, we know went to the national title game this year. So they have their systems in place. There's no, they don't want to mess up chemistry. Whether they don't want a me player, they want somebody who can fit in, and let's take women's basketball. When you have what you have, the last thing you want is to mess anything up. You do not want somebody selfish. Now, as opposed in Iowa's offense with Caitlin Clark, you're going to get every opportunity to score. Every opportunity. However, it's going to take, they want to get the right one. They have, I don't know about limited resources, but certainly they don't have, the richest farmers in the world dealing out $100,000 checks for women's basketball. And then they want to make sure they fit, personality wise. And because, rightly, wrongly, whatever, Iowa does have a personality. And then in football, they know exactly what, they know exactly what, they know they need a wide receiver. They know they need a cornerback, but wide receiver is first. They had an outstanding prospect in yesterday, a 4-star, who left Ohio State, Caleb Brown, who's perfect location, St. Rita's. They have a former, employee and alum, Marty Hopkins, who's the head coach there. Caleb Brown was hosted by Cade McNamara, wined and dined, I suppose. So they know what they want, they know what they need, and he'd be perfect for it. And then men's basketball, you could probably speak more to that, Rob, than I can, but there are challenges there too. So I can understand the impatience. I get impatient too at times, but it is a process, not unlike recruiting. I think what makes it frustrating though, Rob, is when you see players enter the portal and 4 hours later they have a destination, and you're kind of like, or you look at women's basketball and you see Haley Van Lith from Louisville, all of a sudden, boom, she's a LSU, and you need that corresponding move. It just takes time, and you got to make sure it's the right match. But that, I don't know about men's basketball. You probably have more to offer than I do.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's similar to the other two, as we said earlier. They're going to, again, the one blind area that we have is we don't have access to, like, and this is different in pro sports too, but you kind of get an idea of what the market is, right? If somebody's a free agent, when the next when the next quarterback comes up and he's the free agent, you kind of have a number in mind, or where that salary is going to be. Here, Iowa gets Caleb Brown into, and this is just a complete hypothetical because I don't know what this kid is looking for, what his motivation is, what his priorities are there. It's too early. Not enough coffee. But if he comes here and has a really good time and thinks this is a place for him, and NIL is a big thing for him, and somebody else out there that we don't know about offers more money, and that's enough, everything else being equal, that's enough to sway him. We really don't have that as a part of the story. I mean, we hear it, and, with certain players, it's pretty obvious. The kid that went to Miami for basketball, was it Nigel Pack? I mean, people knew what that was. But for the most part, we're in the dark when it comes to NIL and that piece of the puzzle. And that's a big piece of the puzzle right now. And so it really, if you get too wrapped up in this, and I get it, it's, Iowa fans are passionate. They want the best for their team. They're interested. They're engaged. That's great. But just don't drive yourself crazy with this stuff. I mean, Caleb Brown now is going to be the apple of everyone's eye. If he ends up committing elsewhere, you don't know what the reasons were. Don't bash the coaching staff. Don't, if you want more NIL, donate more NIL money to Swarm. You do have control over that, but it's not a streamlined process by any means.
Well, and let's take Caleb Brown, because he was in yesterday, and is an obvious need.
I wrote a story about him in 2019. That's when Iowa offered him.
Okay. So
I went back and looked and did a Google. I'm like, I know this kid. And I looked, Caleb Brown, Hawkeye Nation, boom, came up. Oh, okay, I did write about him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, apparently he's going to Oklahoma and Texas A&M after this. So you're automatically going, okay, NIL, it's going to be hard to beat those two. And then you start to go, what are you offering him that they aren't? And, their offenses are different. They're more potent. A&M's was not last year. It was comparable to Iowa's, but then they revamped the whole damn thing. Iowa did not. Iowa has a new quarterback, but they have good quarterbacks too at those two schools, and one is in the SEC and the other one will be in the SEC. So there's that opportunity there too. And they're more wide open, but Iowa is close to home. Iowa is a really good school too. And Iowa was a better team than both of those two last year with the worst offense in the country. And it's like, again, the recruiting pitch is, yeah, we have Cade McNamara. We have a lot of confidence in him. We think the pieces are there to win a division, to compete in Indianapolis. What we need is a wide receiver like you who can come in and stretch the field, make big plays. You will have every opportunity to make those plays here. And you're only 3.5 hours from home, as opposed to there, it's a flight. And then, so he's got to weigh those decisions, those factors out. I don't know where money sits. And that's what you said, is money is the unknown. We could get, for some players, you could get that information. But really, it's really tough to get the full picture. So then you start to go, okay, well then what about style of offense? I mean, if he wants to be in a wide open offense, Iowa's not going to win that fight. If that's number one. If it's, I want an opportunity to play, well, you're first in line there. Now, if it's, I want an opportunity to play, I want an opportunity to get the ball, and I like the fact I was close to home, then I think you're hitting it every level, plus get some NIL money. So I think that's what you're hoping for. But if offensive scheme is what he's looking for, like, hey, I want 10 targets a game, you're kind of screwed on that one. But, but then again, hey, he was a good sport. He had a ton of pictures on Instagram. He was, he made Iowa his first stop. Iowa brought the quarterback out. Went to Michigan. Caleb went to Ohio State. So now they're at Iowa. So I think that overall, Iowa put its best foot forward. It's not going to be easy. They're playing in rare air here, but if they can win this one, it says a lot about him.
Does have the St. Rita connection. That's nice.
Yes,
Former
absolutely.
Iowa punter Ryan Donahue, St. Rita graduate. So they have connections to that school, and have the longtime coach retired recently. He had coached those guys that played at Iowa, Hopkins and Donahue, and Hopkins took over for his mentor, and Brown has been through the St. Rita program. It's a pretty tight-knit community. It's interesting, Scott, because he chose the blue blood out of high school, right? He had opportunities to go pretty much everywhere. So now he has that experience. He knows what it's like being at the place where they're just going to keep recruiting wide receivers over top of you. And, you get a feeling of what that is. And does he kind of like the Iowa? And this is not a put down on Iowa, but Iowa's not bringing in 4-star receivers every year like they do at Ohio State, where it's a wide receiver factory. Oklahoma's had success at wide receiver. Texas A&M, not as much, but still it's a high profile program with a ton of money and a big investment. It'll be interesting to see if he goes back to another high profile, or his experience at Ohio State maybe makes Iowa a little bit more attractive to him. So that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to see how he ends up, because, going to Ohio State, it's understandable when you're looking at, 2022, where they had three first-round receivers. Jamison Williams transferred to Alabama, who could be like Caleb Brown in some respects, because he was 4th on the depth chart and still was the number 12 pick overall. And then this year, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Next year, we know Marvin Harrison, who I think is the best of the bunch. Is there, and Ibuka, is also probably a first rounder. So
yeah, it's ridiculous.
And they're not, and rightly so. They are a blue blood. They can go get whoever they want, and with their amount of success of putting guys in the NFL, there's no reason for them to slow down. Hey, just because you have Smith and Jigba and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Jamison Williams doesn't mean you shouldn't go out and get Marvin Harrison Jr., and guys like that. And Julian Fleming, who would have been a superstar here, is way down the list, but oh well. That's the way they operate. At Iowa, it is different at that position, especially, but across the board. And so he's got to figure out, does he want to be, that player? He's close to home. There's connections there. He will be a starter. He will be, maximize his abilities for a program that has struggled at that position. Let's not kid ourselves. or does he want to go kind of like Jamison Williams went to Bama? Does he want to go to Oklahoma and do that?
Yeah.
Can he be the player there and more of a wide open offense to some extent, but wasn't very good last year. And certainly, they were 6-7 overall, and their SEC experience may be pretty difficult if they if they continue to falter a little bit. So I think this is it's going to be a fascinating decision. But if he does pick Iowa, Rob, then I think you go in and you feel pretty good about what you got across the board then at that point, because he elevates number one receiver. He is the number one receiver. I don't think there's really any doubt about that now. And you throw in Vines and Ragaini, Seth Anderson, maybe an Alec Wick, then you figure, okay, you've got 4 or 5 guys that you feel pretty good about. And maybe one of the young guys produces or something, but at minimum, you're going to have 3 that you feel like you can march out there and you're not going to be at a complete deficit.
Yeah, no doubt. And we should mention as well, Scott, AJ Henning from Michigan, who we talked about earlier on this podcast, had a relationship with Cade McNamara and Eric All at Michigan, played on the 21 Big Ten championship with those guys, has committed to Northwestern. So he is off the board, never made it to Iowa City. So not sure what the interest level was on either side there. That's one of those things. And Scott mentioned this last week. Just because we're not hearing names, the Iowa coaches are reaching out to targets in the portal and saying, hey, are you interested? Here's our situation. Here's our, here are our credentials. This is what we've done. This is what we've, games we've won. This is our program. Would you be interested in coming in for a visit or talking to us? And if a kid says no, then you just move on. And that probably happens a lot more often than not.
Well, take a look at AJ Henning, and I'm speculating, but you would wonder if you have his former quarterback and his former tight end that are here and he doesn't visit, then maybe they don't think that highly of him. Maybe they told the coaches, I don't know if he's the guy for you. I don't know.
Or they didn't get along.
Yeah. Didn't get along. Maybe he doesn't have the work ethic that they're looking for. Or maybe he's just not good enough. Maybe he was overrated or something like that. And again, maybe he likes Ben Bryant, who's from the Chicagoland area and is now, committed to Northwestern at quarterback. Again, I'd be speculating on that, but I do think that by not visiting, that there's probably some sort of connection from the former Michigan players that suggested that that's probably not a good fit, one way or the other. And
did he visit anywhere else?
I don't know. I don't think.
Yeah,
so.
I didn't follow it that closely either. I didn't see if it was just Northwestern and boom, or he took a couple visits and whatever. But we're still hearing announcements. We're at Thursday? I think yesterday, even though the portal closed on Sunday, names are still popping out. And there's been some really nice wide receivers this week that have come out.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't be opposed if I was Iowa to taking 2, but they're at 84 scholarships now. So and because the portal closed, that anybody who bolts would have to get go down a level, or they would have to, sit out a year. And I don't think that's going to be the case. But so my anticipation is there's probably one. One is probably what they're looking for, maybe 2, and then a couple of the players who maybe have been promised opportunities. Maybe they, go from walk-on to scholarship, that maybe one gets held off until the end of this first semester and, retroactively do it, which is what they've done. In fact, I believe they just did that with Drew Stevens. That he was officially had to pay for his semester. And then at the end of the semester, they retroactively put him on scholarship. So they took care of it and reimbursed him for everything. So I think that's kind of the case with some of these players, especially the walk-ons.
Yeah, that stuff will sort itself out. I have to say, Scott, I kept an open mind, but was a little surprised that we didn't see more at least a 1 or 2 guys from Iowa go into the portal. But we've talked about this dynamic on this podcast since we've been doing it. It's each individual kid, man, what he's looking for, what he wants out of his college experience, what he wants out of his athletic experience. It's not a secret that Brandon Diaz-Fernandez has not gotten on the field. He's had injuries. He's had some times where he's flashed some potential there. And then we get an email earlier this week that he is the MVP of the Iowa Challenge Award, which is kind of an off-season conditioning competition. And seems like he's kind of embedded is probably a strong word, but he is a solid member of this program. And those are the guys we were talking about, those guys in the secondary, maybe AJ Lawson, guys that have been around a while that you figure, okay, maybe they're looking like Reggie Bracey for another opportunity for a chance to play, but they're happy here. And that's great. They don't have to go, unless the coaches say, listen, we don't see any path to playing time for you. And I'm sure there's cases where that can happen, but good for those guys.
I go through the portal and, for each, and I chart them for the Big Ten. And Iowa is like, I think Iowa and Illinois have the lowest entries of the Big Ten. That's a good thing. That means people, we know all about, we talked to Blue in the Face over 3 years ago and stuff. But the fact is that the players want to be here, otherwise they would leave, and even the ones that left, a couple months ago, they were all for different reasons, but it wasn't like they were, felt like they're mistreated or anything. Everybody has disagreements, we all do with our bosses over whether or not we do this right or whatever. But when it comes to, players that you feel like, oh yeah, if I were them, I would consider moving around and they want to stay, it's because they like the environment. They like where they're at, even the ones that probably aren't going to see any action. So yeah, I expected one, maybe two at least to kind of filter their way out. What you really don't want are the surprises. And that happens a lot. And it hasn't happened to Iowa yet, but like the starting defensive lineman, Justin Jacobs is probably the closest one to mind that he was going to be a starter. You don't want that starter key backup to just bolt like that. And that hasn't happened. That's a great thing for Iowa. It's just now, it is a challenge with the numbers, and that's not the worst thing in the world. You can massage those in some respects.
And you just never know what's going to happen. Injuries, other guys may leave, things open up, and you get stories of there's no saying that AJ Lawson and Brandon Diaz-Fernandez and some of the other guys that are going to be upperclassmen that haven't played yet, they may catch a break. Somebody else's misfortune may be their break, and they end up getting in there, and they're, Bradley Fletcher, somebody who doesn't start till his last year, and boom, he's needed and he shines and makes the NFL. So it's a different path for everybody. We like it all to fit in a nice, neat box and everything's mapped out, but that's not how this works.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It would be nice to reach that conclusion. And
okay, you're here for 3 or 4 years and now you didn't get to play. So now you go in the transfer portal. Right. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah. And it's to say what Iowa, it's funny. I've had a couple of conversations with people thinking that maybe they should run off a player or two that's just not on the depth chart, that's an upperclassman, but Ferentz doesn't want to do it that way. And when you do look and you start to see some of the players that you're like, yeah, it's your 5th year and you're the 10th defensive lineman, or it's your 4th year and you're the 12th defensive back. But hey, that they brought him here to do more than just play football, and at least it's not lip service at Iowa, that it is. Other schools would have no problem saying, hey, no path to a playing field. You're welcome to stay, but we're not even going to bring you in as part of the 85. They'll just push them out as hard as they can without cutting them per se. Iowa doesn't do that. And yeah, they could turn out to be a great story. Bradley Fletcher. Another one that was like that to me was Anthony Gare. Back in 2016, he was mainly just a special teamer type, and didn't get a play. And then Miles Taylor got hurt late in the year. He went in and played really well. I mean, to the point of, this guy should have played earlier. This maybe, Phil, this wasn't your, I know how much they liked Miles Taylor, but Anthony Gare played a little bit better than he did, I thought. But that's a great story. And Iowa needs those. Iowa usually has those. They didn't on offense last year, but they certainly could use it. But the other factor though, Rob, that it's been kind of baffling is that there have been a couple of players where you're just like, why don't you move to wide receiver? Defensive backs who are not on the too deep. You look over here and it's like, wow. I mean, yeah, there are pros at just about every position. And you look over there and you're like, they have one scholarship player catching passes this spring. Maybe I should go there. That one floors me. That somebody who's, like Devin Hilson moving to defense. I think he might be physically, that might be his best spot, but getting on the field might be wide receiver. At least you have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I wonder what those conversations are like. The coaches, do they, broach that subject? And because they have in the past. I mean, obviously the position changes we've come to know and love through the years, from Dallas Clark down the line, during the Kirk Ferentz era. It's if the coach opens up that possibility, I think you need to be open to that, but your heart also has to be in it. Don't just move to a position because you may have there's a clearer path to playing time there. But I wonder if those guys have thought about that or have been asked about that and declined, or because it's been going on for so long now where you're like, somebody help, wide receiver. You're not getting on the field on defense. Somebody help.
Exactly. Yeah. And even some of the younger ones that, last year that were true freshmen, I always thought, wow, why, just get on the field. But, they see their future on defense, and that's what they were recruited for. And that's why they're at Iowa. They're not on Iowa when you're first year to go and, all right, well, I wanted to be a defensive back in the NFL because they produce them, but now I want to go play wide receiver so I can get on the field. That's short-term gain for long-term pain. But again, and I don't mean to make AJ Lawson the whipping boy here for this, but that's really would be unfair. But when you're entering your junior year and you're looking at the depth chart and you're going, oh my gosh, there's just there's really not a path. They're bringing in more guys. The younger, redshirt freshmen are playing ahead of you. That's might be your path to the playing field. Now, maybe he just doesn't want to do that. I don't know. Devontae Young went on the other side when he did that, but I just, you do wonder, why that's the case.
Yeah. And AJ did play both ways in high school too. And is a really good athlete, but maybe he just is, maybe he feels like secondary is. And you also, you've put in the work to develop yourself at a position. Your mind is, I'm going to continue on this path of getting better at a given position. And then you're in a developmental program. So that's probably in their mind. If I start a new position, now I'm starting from the ground floor and having to work my way up. So there really aren't any easy answers. But for Iowa, like Scott said, twofold. You get a reputation and your reputation precedes you. So Iowa has a reputation of not running guys off. That's valuable. And number two, they develop players. So maybe everybody has their own developmental path. Some guys get in there right away. Some guys it's 3, 4, maybe 5 years before they hit that spot where everything clicks. So you never know. That's why it's stupid to write people off.
Oh yeah. And you look at, 3 cases of 3 different defensive backs from 3 different locations who chose 3 different options, and none of them are wrong. When you look at Devontae Young, Washington, D.C. kid, moved from, offense to defense, never played there, was a valuable special teamer, but decided to stick, decided to get his degree, played out his career, and enjoyed it. And, and it kind of came back as, hey, you played really well on special teams. Congratulations. He did it the way he wanted to do it. He could have left at any time and chose not to.
And Kirk and Mary Ferentz represented met him at midfield for senior day because his family couldn't make it out.
Exactly.
Great story.
Right. You look at Dallas Craddock, and he was a 4-star, and everybody expected him to be a star that maybe he could start the first year, or at least get on the field his first year, be a starter, all that kind of stuff. Well, it kind of turned out he and Kayvon flipped. Kayvon was the 2-star by rivals anyway, and he became more the 3-year starter. Dallas never really played. He played some special teams. He chose to graduate. He chose to play 5 years. He still stuck with the team through the bowl game and had a really good hit on special teams, and then decided to take his final year, left. No problem there either. He did his job. He did exactly what he wanted to do. He has a degree from a great institution. And then finally, there's Reggie Bracey, who's from, Alabama. He came in, he saw the path of the field wasn't there for him, and he decided to transfer closer to home. No fault there whatsoever. Good player. Maybe if the circumstances were a little bit different, if they didn't bring in a 5-star named Xavier Wampa, maybe he'd have a real good shot at playing. He's been on the depth chart, but it just wasn't there, and he left. He's at Troy. I assume that he'll have a really good career there. That's great, and I don't.
Dallas is at Kent State, right?
Yeah, he's at Kent State. St. Louis kid from Marvin McNutt's high school.
Yep.
Central, I think it is. And so all three had really, chose their paths, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. So it doesn't really, you just have to, but when it comes to the portal, it's tough to be patient because you want the problem solved. You see the problem, you want it solved. There's players available to solve them, but you got to get the right one in. Otherwise it's not solved. It gets worse.
No doubt. It makes the roster crunch a little tighter, trying to, maneuver and address positions of need, so to speak. But these things have a tendency to work themselves out. Scott, another guy, I think Sean Bach from 247 was first to report this, but Antonio Carter, cornerback out of Rhode Island, who I saw, I think it was a University of Washington website wrote, had 20 offers within 72 hours of going into the transfer portal. So obviously a very sought after commodity. Cornerback is obviously a vital piece on defense with all the teams that are throwing the ball around. He has visited Ole Miss and Wisconsin so far. He's scheduled to visit here. I reached out to him and could not find a date. I do not have a 247 subscription, so I don't. It was later this month, I think Sean tweeted out. So we'll see if he makes it to campus. He's got obviously a lot of suitors.
Yeah, and that one's kind of tough, in some ways, because somebody normally you would say, oh yeah, that's the kind of guy that would fit at Iowa, who would want to come to Iowa. A high level guy from an FCS school wants to come here. DBU. I mean,
it's like the opposite of joining Iowa's offense.
Right,
You're
exactly.
like, oh, Iowa's defense. Yeah, I want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. When you see what they've done with players like me, I want to definitely go there. And
I'm talking about from a reputation standpoint too, folks. I'm not ripping the Iowa offense.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm intrigued by the situation involving, Jamari Harris. I guess I must be higher on him than maybe the staff is. I think, it sounded like, he's competing for a spot, and he should obviously, but when you bring in somebody like that, it's not, you better at least make it a 50-50 competition, and at worst, and probably more skewing towards the newcomer. And so
I would think he would probably want some type of, with the options he has, and he's going to know the landscape at Iowa. He's probably going to say, well, what are my chances of starting here? You obviously the one spot's locked.
Yeah. Well, yeah, nobody's beating out Cooper DeJean unless he moves to a different position. Yeah. And so it's like, well, okay. And who's going to move, and who's, Cooper to DeJean, and I think Quinn Schulte are the two obvious ones who are untouchable. You know, they started last year. I would hope that Xavier Wampa is in that category. And frankly, I don't think Sebastian Castro has done anything to lose his job either.
No.
You know, so then that leaves Jamari Harris. And, you know, I thought he played really well a couple years ago. I guess in the spring, it was probably a little bit up and down.
Which is to be expected, though,
Yeah,
right? The guy hasn't played in a while.
Exactly. But, you know, from their perspective, and this is where it kind of harkens back to some of the other players we've discussed, is that, you know, whether it's him not being ready, or maybe he is ready to be the number one, you know, to be a starter, but just not quite there physically yet. They seem to be concerned about number 3, you know, and there's no number 3 that's obvious there. And who is, you know, is that Brennan Diaz-Fernandez? Is that, you know, TJ Hall? Or are they just like, I don't know if either one of them are ready if we got to go out and play them against Penn State, for instance. So that maybe that's what they're looking for. The problem is with the portal is, you know, you go after a kid from Rhode Island and you think, oh, they'd be happy to be here. Well, they got other opportunities too. And as I've said, when it comes to corner, you better get somebody with 2 years of eligibility remaining, not 1, because if they get beat out, that's a bad deal. I mean, because if they're giving up something or giving up other Power 5 opportunities to come to Iowa and get beat out, and that's it, you know, that's not really good. That's not good for them. You know, it's fine for Iowa, but it's not good for them. And that you want to make this a win-win, not a I win and who cares what you think.
Yeah, and folks need to push out of their mind, this kid's coming from Rhode Island, or this kid's coming from Ohio State. Caleb Brown and Antonio Carter, they weren't on the same level coming out of high school, but they're kind of on the same level now in the transfer portal. They're both big time Power 5 schools want them. And that's the difference, right? It's less about potential in a lot of cases and more about productivity and having already proved themselves. Antonio Carter's proved himself. I know it's Rhode Island, but I mean, the kid can play.
Well, you know, and all you have to do is just look at the guys Iowa has gotten in the past from MAC schools, basically, right. You know, who, you know, Desmond King, well, he's going to go to, I mean, he flipped to a bunch of them, but I think Ball State was his last one. You look at Micah Hyde and Geno Stone, you know, they were going to go to Kent State. They were 2-star types. And where are they now? You know, well, Iowa grabbed them at the end, and then they developed at Iowa very quickly. They might have developed at the same rate at those MAC schools. So they, you know, and all 3 are still on NFL rosters and started games last year. So I think you look at, you know, there's no need to look down on anybody. Now, you know, there's a lot of skepticism on wide receiver, and understandably so. You could bring in Marvin Harrison, and then, you know, a third of the fans will go, yeah, but what's he going to do in our offense? You know?
Yeah. And that's part of it too. You don't know, is Iowa's offense suppressing talented players? Hello, Charlie Jones.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the other, is the opposite true?
You know, and you look at, you know, there was some video this week, and I got kind of, I don't know, testy a little bit on social media.
No way.
I mean, you know, everybody's so rational usually.
Right? Yes.
But, you know, there was some video on social media that of Arlen Bruce doing some shakes in practice, which of course, the thing is, a lot of times you don't have time to make those routes anyway. But he did. He looked good doing it. And I think it was Terry Roberts who quote tweeted it and said, "Oh, you always had that in him."
I retweeted Terry Roberts because I enjoy getting people riled up on social media and then walking away.
Yeah. It's a version of crop dusting on social media. But but you know, and then people went back and forth with Terry, and I get it. But until that stigma changes, until they do something at that position, it's always going to be there. And I would say, out of the ones that have left recently, you know, Arlen is, to me, probably the one that didn't quite fit. They didn't put him in the position to make the plays that they should have, I mean, I thought they, now granted, they didn't have any receivers at all for a while last year, but, Charlie Jones, that's bad on Iowa. Keegan Johnson, now, there are issues there. But he, he would have been perfect in this offense, but Arlen was the one who just, the way they chose to play it, it wasn't working. And so I totally get where he is. And it's unfortunate. I thought very highly of Arlen. I still do. I feel very highly about Keegan, and the person that he is too. So, but until Iowa does it, again, I think it's 13 out of the last 24 scholarship receivers, freshmen, have left with eligibility on the table, have transferred out. And then you have others that, like Breck and Emmanuel Ogwo, who decided to play different sports, and,
Yep.
injury guys who moved to positions, like Henry Marquez and Devontae Young. And I mean, and then you're down to about a couple. I think I have it as 6, but 3 of them are still on the team, including like Bostic,
Yeah.
so they've got to start developing quickly. And what it looked like a couple of years ago, that Kelton Copeland turned the corner at receiver, and instead they kind of like the end of the Licklider era, they turned the corner all right and went right into a wall. And they gotta change that narrative, and maybe Caleb Brown's the guy. If he isn't, and he picks a different school, then go get another guy.
Yep.
You just have to. You can't stand pat right now.
No doubt. We are past due for a break here, so we're going to do that. Want to let folks know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org, Systems Unlimited. Over 50 years helping people in our community. We thank them very much for that and supporting the podcast. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors right now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side to look back at the Hawkeyes in the NFL draft and free agency. And we are back here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Sorry about that. I thought I had muted myself. I'm sure there were people out there that was hoping I would, but you're going to have to listen to me for more anyway. Scott, one more thought I had on the receiver position I wanted to get your opinion on here. Sometimes I wonder if they're too rigid positionally. We talked about Arlen Bruce, Nico Reganey, and I'll throw Tyrone Tracy in there too. To me, those guys are all kind of slot guys.
Yeah.
And they were all on the roster at the same time, I think. Bruce and Tracy were together one year with Reganey. It just seems like they have trouble moving guys around at receiver positions. And I wonder sometimes, again, does it seem like it's too rigid to have those lettered positions, the X, Y, what have you?
You want them, but I think their duties may be too rigid, and that might be part of it. And I remember one that stuck out for me, and this is going way back, but you remember when they had Derek Willis, and he was the number 2 X behind Tavon Smith. And to me, they were the best 2 receivers they had on the team at the time. Yet they were playing.
Was that 14?
That was 14. Yes.
Yeah.
And then Willie's quit in the middle of the season. And I'm like,
that was a fun year, wasn't it?
Oh, geez. That was kind of like this year to some extent.
Yeah.
Different. But anyway, yeah, that they are a little bit too rigid, but like going back, Rob, I'm looking at some of these guys and, here's the numbers, that they've recruited since 2013, 24 freshman receivers. 13 have transferred, one retired, and that was Jay Shield. Two switched sports, Agwu and Brecht. And
Agua
then,
for track for those guys that
yeah,
don't
right.
remember him.
Then he went to TCU after that, but that makes sense. But
Yep.
he went for track first. And then three switch positions, which was Marquise, Derek Mitchell, and Devontae Young. And then you start to go through like the 2021 class. It felt like that was when they were turning a corner, and
and you were like, you felt like that was the spots that they were in, Scott, where you piggyback Amir and Brand. You're like right. You said, instead of building with those guys as your foundation, it crumbled.
Right. Because I remember 16 and 17 where it was a flat line there. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, it took some time for Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset, but they got there, and then they got to be pretty decent. But, and then you look at, before, so those three all gone, and that just really sucked the wind out of this program, and then, Bostic's still on the roster, but, I think he's barely dressed, he's been injured. And then in 2020, you have Vines, who, has 10 catches. And I think he'll be a good player, but, where does he fit? How good? We don't know that yet. Kayvon Matthews, left. And then 2019, you have Desmond Hudson. And that was a player who I think was just a little bit too impatient. He left in the middle of the season. I think it was in 21. Just felt like he wasn't going to get an opportunity. He went to UNI, and then, it could have been there. He could have been walking in as a starter, last year and probably this year too. And
he was a guy that they looked at it when he was a true freshman.
Right. He played
to play
3 or 4 games. He hit about the limit. Then in 18, you had Calvin Lockett.
Yeah.
He's at a D2, I think, Delta State or something
Sounds
like that.
Right.
Nico, who's still here. And then Tyrone Tracy, who wasn't used right. I mean, now granted, he played X, and that's probably, one of the things you were talking about. X didn't fit him because you got to win those one-on-one matchups. A lot of times you got to have bigger receivers, or they have to have really big bursts off the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Steve Smith was still a perfect X,
right.
Even though it was small. And then the year before, they actually did get everybody full term. Smith Marquise, who flipped sides, and then Max Cooper, who caught 5 passes. Devontae Young before that. And then you're going into Germanic Smith, Agwu, Adrian Falconer, Shield.
And Germanic Smith was a guy too that flashed early, and
I mean, so and then you go all the way back to 13. Andre Harris, AJ Jones, Derek Mitchell, Derek Willis. Damon Powell had a productive 2 years as a junior college guy. And then Matt Vandenberg, who did turn out to be a pretty good player for him. And then, then they had some success with a few transfers and walk-ons. And, I would say, Charlie Jones was outstanding when he was at Iowa. Riley McCarron, Nick Easley. Those were guys that really produced. And then there were transfers like Oliver Martin that didn't pan out, unfortunately. And I think one of my editors told me, he goes, Charlie Jones was the player that he expected Oliver Martin to be. And I get that. And then, then there was Jonathan Parker and Ryan Boyle, who, dabbled in it. Matt Quarles was here for a cup of coffee, and that's about it. So all that just really tells you that it's just a disaster, and it's been one for a decade. And, when they had success, Rob, way back when, and most of those players were not wide receivers in high school. And I'm not saying that Iowa needs to go down that path of taking an athletic quarterback and turn him into a wide receiver. But man, at some point you gotta just get somebody on the field who makes plays, whether that's Ed Hinkle, who everybody really still loves around here, or Marvin McNutt, who did it 2 years into his career.
Yeah, and Darrell came here too as a high school quarterback and obviously developed well at that position.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, maybe that's the path to get guys that, maybe you can move around and develop. But Keenan Davis was a good get, but that one's right up the street. They need to go hard after a kid in the 25 class here from West Des Moines Valley, Zay Robinson. I think he's the next one, Scott. I think he's the next in-state 4-star type receiver who's going to kind of blow up.
Go to Michigan.
To go to Michigan, right? Follow Amara Darboh and who was the other kid from Wash? Adrian Arrington.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But Zay Robinson is the guy to keep your eyes on. Really good basketball player too. So he's a guy that people will start hearing about a lot more this fall. Just kind of started the flash, but he's performed well at showcases this spring. And he popped out to me immediately when I watched them play last year. So have to keep the in-state kids in state and not going to Iowa State, so to speak. So, and
I'll say this, that they did a really good job of next year's class. They struggled. They had their worst year, I thought, in state this last year, especially when they lost to Proctor. That was the hard one. But they lost head-to-head to Iowa State on a couple of positions. But next year they came back fists of fury, and that's really worked for them. Yeah,
that Des Moines metro area, man, that's kind of the battleground now, so to speak, if I can use that word, the war reference. But you look at guys like Kai Black and Jameson Pattison and guys like that Iowa needs to make sure they do better in that area. They've done really well in this 24 class. Some small school kids, a lot of defensive kids. They need to make sure they can address issues, on the offense too. With when you have top players in state, try to keep them, and they've done that. I mean, Brevin Dahl is a playmaker, and he's ADM. He's a smaller school kid. People will probably poo-poo that, but he's a good player. Yeah, he's a good player. And I did a Q&A a couple weeks ago with Derek Hudger from Iowa State, their recruiting director, and they're in play, and they have targeted especially Polk County, Central Iowa, because their base is, it's formidable now. 20 years ago it wasn't. 20 years ago the Des Moines area was a mix maybe between Iowa and Iowa State fans. It's now a little bit more solidly Cardinal colored, I think, and they've made enough of a reputation that they can push in Des Moines, and Iowa has to. I think Iowa respects it, but it's not easy. And getting guys like David Kolker, and that was another one. And basically, what they sold him on was playing time. And they kept pushing when Iowa, and it used to be a little bit more gentlemanly, I suppose, between the two. Paul Rhodes would avoid Iowa. Yeah, right. And you could probably argue that they did too much. That when you look at, instead of going head to head, the only time he burst about Alan Lazard when Iowa made a last second, hey, would you like to come here? But hey, he's a Jet now. Yeah, exactly. We got Green Bay East. And you got Iowa State East. Yeah. Lazard and Brees Hall and Will McDonald now. Me and my Iowa State people. Yeah. Be rallying on Sundays this fall. Yep. You're going to go to Cedar Rapids and go to the Iowa State bar and watch. We're all going to go to a dark place and hang out and cleanse ourselves. Well, I asked one of the Iowa State radio people last week. I said, so what now? Are you gonna root for the Jets or the 49ers? Because everybody had flipped over to the 49ers because of Brock Purdy. And I don't know. So what happens if Will McDonald sacks Brock Purdy and hurts him again? Oh my gosh. We will. We're going to dive more into. Well, I'm sure this is probably going to be a weekly transfer portal portion of this podcast. It's just kind of the age we live in here. I have not heard much on the women's basketball front of the transfer portal. Not much from the men's after Crick joined the team. I know they're handing out a lot of 24, 25, 26 offers right now. It's a live period for basketball, so you'll see a lot more there in terms of Iowa offering guys. I still think there's a chance, a decent chance that Evan Bruns, the kid from West High that went to Belmont, that's in the portal, 6'10-ish. He's kind of like Crick, to be honest with you, and Philip Rebracha kind of in that mold. He's pretty athletic. So there's a possibility that he ends up here. I think it's going to be a matter of, if it works out or doesn't work out. And so we'll keep an eye on basketball as well, but football is at the forefront right now, as was the NFL draft this past weekend. I don't know if I wrote down or put in my notes what my predictions were, Scott. I know they were shitty. I can relate that to people. I think I had Van Ness going 20 to Seattle, if I remember correctly. And that was off.
Yeah.
How'd you do?
I did okay. I didn't hit the right ones, which usually I come close.
I did have Merriweather going to Tampa, but I had him being drafted.
Yeah, you did have him drafted. So that's like half a point, Rob.
Yes, I get half a point for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Put it in the books.
Yes.
Put it on the board.
Yeah. Yes. See, I had the Mighty Bears taking Lucas Van Ness.
Yeah, and then there was some trading.
Yeah, and then Jalen Carter fell right into their lap, and they decided to trade back and not take him, even though they only had 20 sacks last year. And I did.
That's one of those ones that could come back and haunt you.
Yeah, they took a right tackle. So I'm thinking, you know what? You went from the number 1 pick overall to a right tackle at 10. That's interesting. But I did all the grades for the Athletic on the first 3 rounds, which was an undertaking that is very, very difficult. Because I wrote like 125 or whatever descriptions of players, just kind of their college, but so that's a lot, because I'm constantly looking up what they're doing. And then I have to cap it with not only a grade, but a reason for the grade. And I gave the Bears a D-, and oh my God, Bears Nation mauled me,
What'd you give the Jets? It was probably bad.
No, it wasn't as bad as the Bears. It might have been a B- or something like that. Cause I thought I understood when they got jumped over to get for the tackle.
Yeah.
That it was
pissed me off.
Yeah. It was just kind of like, well, what do you do? Get a pass rusher. That's kind of like, all right, when in doubt, get a pass rusher, right? For a pretty good defense.
I've got PTSD from the jump over trade draft pick from the Brett Favre Browning Nagel debacle. Yes. As a Jet fan, that still haunts me.
Yes. Oh my God. and Atlanta of all places did that.
I know.
But the Jets.
But we had Campbell going in the first round.
Yeah, I had him to Buffalo.
You did have him in the first round. Where'd you have him going?
Buffalo at 27.
Okay.
But in kind of my descriptions, I always said that Detroit was very interested in him. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't think Detroit would take him at 18. What I thought might happen is for, let's say, the Cowboys, if the running backs would have fallen, that Bijan Robinson would have been around or something, then the Cowboys might have jumped up to 18 and then maybe Detroit takes him at 6. But I knew he wouldn't escape Buffalo. Buffalo wanted him that bad. And then Sam went in the second round, Sam Laporta. I had him in the second round. I think it was to Miami, maybe.
Yep, he was 34 overall to Detroit. I had him 58 to Dallas.
Yeah.
And I had Moss 119 to Minnesota.
Yeah, you got him in the 4th round. I had him in the 3rd at 80, and he went 83 to Denver, where he visited Denver right before the draft, Denver and Kansas City. So there was an interest. I was disappointed. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed for Kayvon Merriweather. I wanted him to get drafted. I want them all to get drafted. I want them to have that opportunity, that special moment. It's really important. And, it kind of culminates your college career and it's a graduation moment. And when you don't get that, you're agreeing to terms on a free agent deal, but you can't ever get that back. And so I was disappointed for him, but I will say he's in a great situation, being in Tampa Bay, because they really need safeties and they're really up against the cap. And one of the things that happens when you're up against the cap is you start keeping undrafted free agents if they fit. And he's got a really good chance. And then Seth Benson went to Denver. That's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie. But Seth Benson's overcome a lot in his career. So if he makes it to a practice team, or if somebody gets hurt, he's got a chance there. And then Monty Pottebaum, he's the only fullback at Pittsburgh right now. And so that'll be, he won't have to, he can still keep his black and gold, right? And
Yep.
And then there are 2 tryouts this week. Jack Wagner is in Baltimore, and Jack Plum's in Green Bay, his hometown. So
that's a cool story.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if we can at least go to camp with them. That might be tough, but you never know. And I hope Wagner signs. That would be nice.
Yeah, Baltimore it's one of those NFL teams that has a keen eye for talent. So the fact they're bringing him in means they see something there, and hopefully that works out for him as well. What did you think of the landing spots for the top 3 guys? Obviously Van Ness in Green Bay, and then Jack and Sam both going to Detroit.
It's really interesting to see Van Ness in a 3-4 as kind of an outside backer.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
I saw him more as a 4-3 end who could slide inside on pass rush situations, but they play a different 3-4 than you're used to. It's kind of like the only thing really making them a 3-4 is they're more of a 2-point stance, because they do play the same way. Is set a hard edge, in the run game. So he fits in well there. With Rashawn Gary getting an ACL last year, they kind of needed somebody like him. They have Preston Smith, who's 31 or whatever. So I think he's going to be fine. He'll probably start right away. But then after that, I think you look at the Campbell and Laporta. Campbell on paper was a reach. He was judged as kind of a guy in the 30s, maybe 40s. He went 18 overall. So Detroit kind of gets downgraded for that. But what Detroit needs, he's absolutely perfect. They needed a leader on defense. They had Aiden Hutchinson, and they had some guys in the secondary, but they needed that presence in the middle linebacker who could kind of do it all and keep that focus and that tenacity and make all the calls and just fight. Perfect fit. Will start day one. If he doesn't get hurt or whatever, he's a decade-long player for the Lions, and really fits in well. And then Sam Laporta is kind of the same way. I mean, Detroit trades an Iowa tight end, and then they draft one. As we got to know both TJ and Sam over the years, TJ I thought was a little bit better pass catcher. At least had better hands, a little bit bigger. At Iowa he was a better blocker, but in the NFL he was not a very good blocker. Just kind of decided to focus more on his pass catching. Whereas I think Sam brings a different level of tenacity and toughness and raw energy. It's more Kittle-like, I think. So I would expect, I think he starts from the beginning, and I think it probably takes some time to work up to a really good level. But I think, all 3 of those guys will be starters in their rookie year.
What's the setup for Riley in Denver? What's the depth chart look like there? What are his does he have a path?
Oh yeah, he may start. I know yesterday I was watching Path to the Draft on NFL Network, and they list him as a starter.
Nice.
And a corner, maybe a safety. They're all announced as defensive backs, but they really like him. And when you look at the stereotypes that he has to face, what other people did too, is his physical abilities don't match. The stiff hips that sometimes afflict people like me.
I have a stiff hip and back.
Right, exactly. He doesn't have that because he was a hurdler. He's got really loose hips, and they're oily, and he's a 4.45 guy, and he's disappointed with that time. He thought he would hit sub 4.4, and great ball skills, can catch anything in his power, and just I think it's a really good fit for him. I thought just about any team would be, but I think a team that relies on zone coverage a lot, I think that's a good place. And the one thing about Riley is he's got a lot of fight to him, and he's fought through a lot of adversity in his career. So, and he'll continue to do that, and he'll struggle, he'll get beat, but I think he's going to be a pretty tough out long-term in the NFL.
He's got a good role model there in Denver, and a former Hawkeye who also overcame stereotypes and people viewing him not being a cookie cutter, quote unquote, the standard, what you're looking for in a linebacker, in Josie Jewell, who was headed to what, Wartburg? Luther. I can get those mixed up.
Yeah, Decorah. But you think about it, there are 3 guys on the Denver roster right now.
Yeah. Ojemudia too.
No, he's with the Bears.
Oh, that's right. They moved him.
Yeah, they got rid of him. And you could throw him in the mix too.
Yeah.
4 2-stars.
Yeah.
Seth Benson, Josie Jewell, Riley Moss, and Ojemudia was at least my rivals. And I don't know about you, what you noticed, but I see some of the revisionist here of some of the recruiting where I kind of look at them as like when they committed, they were a 2-star, and then magically they're a 3-star.
It happens quick too. Yeah. If you're not on it, you'll be like, okay, wasn't that guy a 2-star yesterday? Yeah. And then he committed to Iowa. Now he's a 3-star.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, but the other thing is, I think I counted up, they have 43 players right now on NFL rosters, and 32 were 3-stars. That's pretty good development.
Yeah, no doubt. And there are more guys that will be on the Hawkeyes in 23, plenty more guys that have NFL potential. We'll talk a little bit about that on the other side of this break. We'll wrap up with that. So hang in there, Scott, and I'll be back in a couple seconds. Well, more than a couple seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And we're back here. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Had a pretty good crowd in the chat room today. Don't be shy in there in the future. Spout off, have a hot take, things like that. We welcome everything in the chat room. Well, not everything. Hawkeye-related hot takes. Let's keep it to that. But saw a couple way too early. If they're way too early, why are we doing it, Scott? If it's too early, then wait. But that's kind of the shtick, so to speak, with these mock drafts for 24.
Yeah, I did it too.
The ones I've looked, you did one too?
I did, and then I'm going to be a part of them coming up in the
so you're part of the problem.
I am the problem. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I did Iowa players to look for 2024 and in my post on Monday. And then, in the coming weeks, I've got to do Big Ten and then outside of the Power 5. So, yeah.
Let's throw some names out there. Let's have some fun with this. It looks, I think the one everybody's kind of on is Cooper DeJean as a first-round pick next year. I think that's going to be a consensus. I think after he has his, after he puts together this junior season, hopefully health-wise, he's going to do nothing but improve his stock this season. So he's solidly there. Did Dane do one?
Yeah, Dane did, and so did.
He had him at like 16 or something, didn't he?
He had him 21. Pro Football
21. Okay.
Pro Football Focus had him 15.
Okay.
He, to have 3 pick sixes last year, 5 interceptions, averaging 16.5 yards per punt return. Rob, we've seen a lot of great, and I mean great, defensive backs.
Physicality too. That's an underrated part of his game.
He's got the best combination of every skill you want. He's got the physicality of Desmond King and kind of the nose for the ball, but he's a better athlete. And, he's kind of like that Desmond King hybrid with Micah Hyde.
And you know what? He's not a 2-star.
No,
He was a 4-star in a U.S. whatever they call that, the All-American game. I mean, he was in the best All-Star game there is.
And it's crazy that he wasn't recruited like he was, and Kirk tries to play him off like, well, I don't know why anybody didn't recruit him. Well, they still graded him pretty damn high.
Yeah.
But if he would have came out this year, he would have been the best safety in the draft. He would have been a first rounder, Rob, this year. So would have Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, there's some good guys in the Big Ten coming back.
Yeah, he easily would have been the best receiver in the draft, no question. But yeah, DeJean would have been the best safety. He would have been a first rounder. He's got all the skills you need for that position, and he plays corner at Iowa. That's not going to change. I think he's great there. But I think safety at the next level, and he's a matchup safety, and he can play cover the slot. He can hit. He can play the box. He can play everywhere you want him to play. And Iowa hasn't had a first round defensive back since Tommy Knight in 1997. So that's a long time ago. And so Iowa's
thought Josh Jackson might be that guy, but he did not happen.
No, he didn't. He went for all the Micah Hydes and Desmond Kings and Riley Moss in the third round. They've got a lot of really good players and a lot of starters in the NFL and some Pro Bowlers and stuff, but not a first rounder. But Cooper is a first rounder. I mean, if his trajectory remains even plateaus, I mean, I don't expect that, but as long as he's not hurt, he's, he should go to Detroit for the draft where it's held next year.
Who else you got? 24 from Iowa.
Well, I've got 2 tight ends, Eric All and Luke Lachey. Luke's going into his 4th year, and he's got the size and he's got all the raw abilities. I think he started to ascend a lot last year. You could always see the potential, and it was always getting better and better. And I think towards the end of the season in November and December, and then in the bowl game, it really took off. And I think Eric All is already there. I mean, he's built for the game, and it's just a matter of can he stay healthy. So I think those 2. What is kind of fascinating is after those 3, it drops off a little bit at Iowa, where you're going to have to project now. Like Tory Taylor, I think he could be a draft pick, a late round of guy.
There were quite a few specialists that were drafted this year, weren't there? Did you have a number on that?
I think there were 3 punters and 2 kickers.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
That's a little more than I thought. And especially one as high as, that went in the 3rd round, Jake Moody from Michigan. But, so I still think Tory Taylor might be like a 6th rounder next year. And then looking at some of the Iowa guys, there's the incoming, Nick Jackson and Rusty Feth.
Mm-hmm.
Can they kind of boost their profile and become draft picks? I think Logan Lee is a really good chance. I think he's a really good player. Shannon and Evans are, along with Quinn Schulte and Sebastian Castro, probably are more just
free agents.
Yeah, same thing with Ragaini. Probably more free agents guys, but you never know. 7th rounder. Hey, we play a 3-4. We like Joe Evans to play outside backer in a 3-4, because he's the perfect build for Wisconsin for that type of defense. Maybe there's something like that. I think Logan Lee is probably the more likely of the bunch. And then there's a bunch of younger players that are more projections, and I didn't list just because I thought that it's probably not fair or right. Guys like Deontay Craig.
Yeah, he was the guy I was going to ask you about. I think he breaks out this year. I think he could put himself in position with a good season.
No question. Him, Mason Richmond could.
Yeah.
Connor Colby has been listed, I think, by PFF. You want to see more, obviously, but when at times I felt like they were pretty close, to being the player that they could be. And it's just a matter of getting over the top and getting there. So I think that they are.
Then 25, we've got what? Caleb and Xavier?
Yeah. Caleb.
Maybe Xavier.
Yeah. Xavier.
We'll see.
Right. Jamari Harris, maybe even next year.
Yeah.
Just as again, Jay Higgins. So you start going through the starters. Aaron Graves, Y.A. Black.
They all have that. They're all kind of on that path.
Yeah. So, you'd like to see, YA and Aaron, I think by the time they get to be seniors or something like that, they'll be, they'll have their opportunities, and then they'll go through it. Logan Jones, Dejon Parker was somebody I didn't put, but I'm like, oh, maybe, you just don't know. So I think next year I could see 5 potential, candidates, really good ones. Cooper, of course, the 2 tight ends, Torrey Taylor and Logan Lee. But, if Nick Jackson has a great year, maybe he's a 4th or 5th rounder, and then maybe one of the other guys, Joe Evans, maybe is a late rounder or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see guys kind of pop out. Like, I don't think sitting here last year, I mean, we thought we saw the potential that Van Ness had, but you'd have been, I think people would have kind of looked sideways at you if you said, yeah, he's going to be the 13th pick in the draft next year. I mean, you can envision that possibility, but then it actually has to happen. And I think there's a clearer picture for Cooper than there was for Lucas last year at this time. But I think the Van Ness example is you don't know what's going to happen this fall. And, maybe that is Deontay Craig. Maybe he goes out of his mind and turns out to be, I don't know about a top 13 pick, but just has a decision to make.
Well, exactly. I mean, they had the same number of sacks and he did it with like 150 fewer snaps. So Deontay Craig is the breakout type guy this year. And, it seems pretty obvious to me. It's just a matter of, can he keep building on that? And the thing is, Lucas Van Ness had some rare gifts physically. He's built that way, just built like an NFL player. And so is Deontay to an extent, but not quite like Lucas. But if you go out there and you have double-digit sacks and you're in your 4th year, you've got a chance. You could you can at least get rated, and see where you fit. And if you're, probably a 3rd rounder. I mean, Lucas Van Ness was going to be a 1st rounder. Everybody knew it. Everybody except message board guy who said, well, he needs to come back for 1 more year. Well, no, just the same people. I've been seeing that with Chris Murray, our guys, Sam Vanessa, he's really good. He has him at 20th in the draft. He's going to be a 1st.
He seems solidly in the 1st round by most prognostications.
Yeah. And so Chris Murray's going to go in the draft, but when he actually declared and, going through, again, message board guys, oh, he's not ready for the NBA. He's not ready. He didn't do this. He didn't do this in the big moments and all that stuff. Like, do you guys not get it? Well, first of all, how many NBA games have you watched? Oh, you haven't watched any since the Bulls in the 90s? Oh, you did watch a Kobe game. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, he's going to make the NBA. He's going to probably play a lot next year. So, so it's just that kind of cracks me up. It's when you get, your vision is so narrow to what you like and you don't see it because they don't necessarily, he didn't play like Caitlin Clark, but I think this year, there's going to be some breakout guys on the football team though.
Yeah, it always seems to happen around here. Iowa consistently developing guys for the NFL, and that's really a selling point as well. We talked about the recruiting last year in the portal or earlier this podcast about, what are your selling points? And that's still difficult on offense, not difficult on defense when you're in the transfer portal. And then opportunity. And we'll see everybody's, I know, locked in on what Iowa can add here at wide receiver. And it really is important, Scott. I don't think it's overblown at all. This is an important phase right now. The coaches are out on the road, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. It's an open period for recruiting. I know Abdul Hodge has been in Florida this week handing out offers, and guys are around the country. I did a story on a receiver last night from Nashville, Tennessee. Copeland was down there and they offered him. So they're out. And just to circle back around to end it on this, Scott, about the the culture and the chemistry that Bluter and McCaffrey and Kirk Ferentz want. These programs will supplement from the transfer portal when there are needs, but all three of these programs are going to be based on prep prospects being developed.
That's how you have to live. You just don't have the recruiting prowess and I mean, now Iowa State lived that way in basketball, but it also crapped out a few times and it had some bad characters in basketball. But when you look at, I know there's a lot of complaints, about Iowa's offense and Brian Ferentz and everything like that. But once they get that next receiver, when you start to look at how they supplemented the offense in particular, but also defense in one spot, when you say, okay, they added 2 quarterbacks who are better than the quarterbacks they had last year, a receiver who was the conference freshman of the year, and then whoever the next receiver is, when they added a guy that I think is going to be in the top maybe 100 picks in the NFL draft next year at tight end, 2 offensive linemen who are in their 5th year, and then you throw on a 2-time second-team All-ACC linebacker, replacing the best linebacker in school history, end type next paragraph. That's really that they've been busy. They have fully supplemented to their capabilities people that have been in the portal, and they have dabbled in it before, but now, Rob, they are sold in it, and I think it's a good thing. And they filled pieces. If Feth and Parker, imagine if they both start, and then you throw on 3 juniors that have at least 1 and in 2 cases 2 years of experience already. Your offensive line's better. Your quarterback is clearly better. You got an extra wide receiver and probably 2 wide receivers who are at least in the rotation. And then you've got a linebacker who has 2 consecutive years of 100+ tackles. That's good. And for Iowa, that's a change, and it's a welcome change. So yes, there's always ways to complain, but I think that you should be pretty happy with what they did. And to top it all off, they brought back 3 6-year guys that are starters. So they've done a lot. I mean, that's not necessarily it's not flashy in some ways, but I think in other ways it is. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, you address needs, right? That's kind of what they did. They addressed areas of need, areas that we talked about, during the fall last year and into the off season. And you hope, just one example, you bring an Eric All in, and that allows Addison Estrenga another season to develop because the potential's there. If you watch any of Addison Estrenga in open practice, you can see the potential there, but he's probably not ready yet to be that second guy. Next year, he probably is. So then, linebacker, you bring Nick Jackson in because some of those other guys are still in the developmental phase. Yeah. He comes in, plays a year, then maybe some of those other guys are ready. And that's kind of what you do. And then maybe your hot spot is at a different position next year, and you address that in the transfer portal and then allow the younger guys to develop behind whoever that is.
Yeah. And, they've had some incredibly bad luck at offensive line, with injuries. When you look at last year in particular, if Justin Britt and Cody Ince are healthy, they look a lot different. If David Davidkoff was still around, maybe they look different there. All the
lose Justice Sullivan at linebacker.
Yeah, he was a 4-star and never could get past COVID. And one of the stories. The losing Joe Alt.
Yeah,
they had him, and
I wrote about him a couple times.
Yeah, that was probably the other side of the Doyle situation. At Doyle State, he'd probably be in Iowa, and he's, probably a first-team All-American this year coming up. I know he was a second-teamer last year.
First-round pick, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No question.
Notre Dame, for those that don't know.
Yeah,
that's right. John Alt's son.
Yeah. So, there's a lot there. Some of it, the wide receiver attrition, I think, is self-inflicted. The others aren't. Cody Ince was an NFL guy, and he physically couldn't handle it anymore. So I just think overall, they've done a really good job of supplementing their team. They still have kept the primary tenets and principles they want to apply, and get one more, and really you can't complain about the portal anymore.
Yep, addressing needs, and Iowa has done that now in pursuit of a wide receiver or two and potentially a cornerback as well if they can get the right guys. Kirk Ferentz made that crystal clear at his last press conference at the end of spring ball that they are going to do due diligence in and they do this too in recruiting. I mean, they talk to the custodians, they talk to teachers at school. They try to do the best they can to find out who a guy is, and that's important. And I don't think that changes when you go into the transfer portal. So time to hop out of here. I got things to do. Scott's got things to do, and appreciate you guys jumping on with us a little bit early today. And we will be back next week, next Thursday, for the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Until then, be well, and we will talk to you then. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.